Okay, wonderful. Christina, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Very excited for the Google panel. So for everybody, again, Google have partnered with us for this event. You will, of course, all know who Google are, no doubt. And, of course, leaders in the design and innovation fields. So a big thank you to Google for sponsoring and partnering with the event. Very, very excited for the panel that is coming up. I believe we're still waiting for Jana to come through.
Yeah, so let's get started by introducing ourselves. I've done my bit, but for those who joined the call now, it's not exactly 4 o'clock yet. So maybe should start with intros again. So I'm Chris Bilsland, and I work at Google leading research for Android's digital well-being. I've done this for about 1.5 years. And have this amazing panel with us today to discuss some of the issues that I've encountered along the way. Maybe, Sarah, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Is feel robotic.
It's a bit robotic. We can understand what you're saying. So.
Just start now.
Yeah, okay. Why don't we start with Jana, and then Sarah can maybe sort out maybe it's the headphones or something. Should we start with you, Jana?
Sure, I'm happy to. Do I sound okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me to this panel. And I'll say a little bit about myself and my organization because I'm a little bit different. And maybe one of these things is not like the other on the panel. So I'm Jana Herotatis. I'm Vice President for Research at Hopelab, which is a... Are you guys getting feedback? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's still coming from Sarah's, because when Sarah muted, it stopped. I wonder, Sarah, if it might be worth you trying to log off and log on again. Because you didn't have this before with you.
I know. Okay. So anyway, I'll keep going. The show must go on. So yeah, anyway, I work at Hopelab, which is located in the San Francisco Bay Area in California in the US. And a word about Hopelab, we are a nonprofit social innovation lab that creates scaled digital tools to improve the health and well-being of teens and young adults. And we've been founded back in 2001. We've been around a long time. And we're really we're sort of the youth and tech and health arm of a larger group of organizations called the Omedear Group, which represent this kind of social enterprises of the philanthropic arm of Pam and Pierre Omedear. And Pierre Omedear, of course, is the founder of eBay. And so for the past almost 20 years, we've been applying behavioral science, human-centered design, social technology development, and philanthropic capital to support impactful digital health innovation with and for young people, to elevate and ultimately redefine what we hope will be a positive trajectory of health and well-being for this generation. So we're just delighted to be part of the conversation with all of you to think together about how we can do that in innovative ways. So that's me.
Thanks, Janice. Great to have you. Shall we try Sarah again?
Is it okay now?
Perfect. We can hear you.
So sorry for that before. I didn't even want to hear how I sounded. Yeah, so I'm Sarah. I work with Chris. I'm a senior UX designer at Google, and I've been leading a variety of digital well-being projects and cross-product initiatives for the past 1.5 years. And prior joining Google, I was working with a hospital on clinician-facing products. I was with some other startups also looking into healthcare. I also did a quick stop at IDEO. And yeah, basically, throughout my career, I've been really stubborn about the projects that I'm choosing. And I really always wanted to work on things that have the impact on people and are prioritizing people's goals over the goals of the business that would, just bring the the revenue for the sake of it. So that's about me.
So great to have you, Sarah. Hi, Lauren. Thanks for joining us. Might have been some technical difficulties, I don't know, but it's great to have you. We just sorted them with Sarah as well. So now we're all on board. It's great. We're doing introductions. So we have Darren and Lauren to introduce themselves. So whoever wants to go next.
Lauren?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Wilcox. I'm a staff researcher at Google and an associate professor at Georgia Tech. Right now, I'm spending most of my time as a research lead in the well-being lab at Google. And we conduct research on well-being needs and tech use to define well-being principles and toolkits that can influence how products are designed and built, and essentially to make human well-being really core to that process.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Lauren. And finally, we have Darren with us.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, good. Okay. My name is Darren Hood. I am been a user experience professional. I've been working in the discipline since 1995 and full-time for the last 16 years or so. My footprint's pretty broad, Fortune 50, all the way down to you name it. Then I've done work for Ford, done work for GM. I've done work for Cengage Learning, National Geographic Learning, Writer, Quicken Loans, you name it. I've been around. You may have even seen me around on social media a bit. I sort of get around a bit out there. Currently serving as a senior learning experience designer, getting to apply UX principles to the experience for students in educational spaces and academia. I'm working at Michigan State University now. I'm also a professor, an adjunct professor at Kent State University in the Master's of User Experience Design program. And I also teach UX-related courses at Lawrence Technological University in Southfield, Michigan. So that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Well, I told you guys we have an amazing panel. I'm so glad you could all join. Yeah, and I just wanted to say to everyone watching is that this will be a conversation between us, the panelists, but I'm really keen to get everyone's participation as well. So please use the Q&A to ask your questions, and I'll do my best to incorporate them into the conversation as we go along, and I'll also allow sometimes during some breaks between topics to ask your questions. So please ask away. So I thought it would be fun to just get started, to start with a little poll that is very much to do with what got my team started in digital wellbeing. Can we get the poll up, please? Do you feel 100% in control of your tech use? Yes or no? Okay, and I'm curious to hear what the panelists voted on that one.
Absolutely not. And it's hilarious because we designed for it, but yeah.
I do,
Yeah.
but I think it's something that I have been practicing quite a bit. I think discipline is at the core of it, so I make sure to be in control. But I love all the new implementations that people have been putting into their apps and their devices to help support that.
How about you, Jenna?
No, I mean, I try, like Darren, to create, rules and structures, no tech after 9, that kind of stuff. But, I think one of the challenges that we all probably acknowledge is that there's a lot of this that rests on self-control. And self-control is finite, right? It gets exhausted. We're all in a pandemic. We're using all of our self-control just to remember to wash our hands, And so I think what that draws attention to is that we want to be designing in ways that don't rely on our, ever renewing self-control to do the things that are good for us, right? So I would say I could use help.
Yeah. And how about you, Lauren? Do you feel completely in control?
I don't, and I also realize the irony given the space within which I'm working. But you know, as Janice said, I think there are limitations, right, to that kind of self-regulatory capacity that we all have, and so I have noticed though particular things I'm vulnerable to, and I'm trying to pay more attention to that. That I might spend more time scrolling through news than I intend to, or using tech late at night. I'm pretty good at focusing when I have a work task to do. It's harder, I think, when I have free time to think intentionally about how to use that free time. So that's my current goal, is just those times when it's easier to slip into unintentional use. How am I thinking about what are my goals right now, and taking a step back to ask those questions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something we saw in research a lot. I think you've seen in your research as well that this sort of like unstructured time seems to be the most vulnerable time to unintended tech use. So I thought it'd be interesting to get your perspectives on, because you all come from various different angles to digital well-being. And I'd like to just take the time to set the scene a little bit and to understand what your take on digital well-being is. What does it mean to you in your work? And shall I call someone out? Maybe Jana could kick off with this one.
Yeah, happy to. It's a great question. You know, as I said in my intro, the organization that I work for, Hopelab, is founded on a mission of using digital to improve well-being for young people. So it's kind of core to our mission. And the way that we think about digital well-being is really kind of an intentionality. We try to think about kind of an R&D meets behavioral science approach to this area. We think of it as reverse engineering. Actually, that's kind of the metaphor we use, reverse engineering tech for health. So it's sort of the intentional design and co-design of technology to support specific positive behavioral or emotional or psychological targets in ways that we know drive positive health outcomes. So, you know, we think about how can we design technology to support resilience, you know, our innate capacity to cope and even thrive in the face of the challenges that we're all surrounded with. And so we think about how can we intentionally design technology to boost a sense of meaning, to boost meaningful connection, deep connection. And so for us, that's really core to how we think about this space of digital well-being. It's really the intentional use of the digital to support really measurable targets that we know matter for our health. And the only other thing I would add is that we also like to think, and I think this might appeal to the UX designers, we try to think about kind of the motivation, the motivational psychology at play here. And we think about play, you know, play at its core, the sort of delightful, innately rewarding activity that we do because it brings us joy, right? So we think tech at its best is experience like play, right? It's that pleasurable drive to learn and explore and connect. And so we try to think about digital health as essentially play that works for our health, right? It feels playful, it feels innately rewarding, and it works for us. It's helping us achieve the health and kind of happiness outcomes that matter for us.
Yeah, you talked about the intention of it, and I think intention is something that we talk a lot about in digital well-being at Google. It would be interesting to hear, Sarah and Lauren, your sort of different angles on this question as well. Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. I mean, so basically, I think one of the ways of thinking of intention is supporting me in living my life, and support versus hindering. And so not hindering me in getting good rest, not hindering me in being present with my family, but instead supporting some of those activities. And so in terms of how we tried to help users achieve that in the past, I think we've been focused on avoiding overuse, managing screen time, thinking about how controlling some of those variables might help with presence, and more kind of awareness, of one's everyday goals and ability to meet those goals. I think that's changing, and so that'll be an interesting thing to also think about as a panel. Should we think about this in terms of overuse, right, and screen time, and the kinds of traditional things that we would tend to think about with digital well-being? I think that's probably evolving for many of us.
That's yeah, I just want to build on that, and I think it's really. By the way, I'm not interrupting you, right?
Oh no, sorry. That's it.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. So basically, I don't want to refer that much on the things that we did at Google, just because the confidentiality and everything. But as a designer, I would just like to reflect on what I see in the industry. I think Lauren put it really well, and like especially as a designer, what research really helps me do is basically research frames what people need. They are really great at understanding that, at getting at the bottom of that, at understanding the wider context of people's lives. And then design has this great ability of figuring out how to get people to what they need. But I think that looking at the wider industry, this has been often misused. So where basically design takes people to this destination that is defined by the business and not by themselves. So basically design enables engagement, with that it creates profit. And in turn, people continue being highly engaged with digital products, and there is a risk that it will negatively impact their mental well-being. And that kind of means that designing with digital well-being in mind is a choice. And that choice is often not made by designers, but by the business. And I would really like to see our industry being ethical in design, where this is not just a choice, but a requirement. And I really believe that design can help businesses do that in just, being creative and figuring out how to contribute to monetization, but not at the expense of people's well-being.
That's great. I think, you talked about ethics here, and this a topic I want us to cover in a little bit and get everyone's take on this. I just wanted to give Darren first a chance to give his take on it. And I know that Darren's been thinking a lot about ethics and UX design as well.
Yeah, I absolutely love this topic, though, and I've got to give Google kudos for a lot of the work that they've been doing in these spaces about digital well-being. A lot of fantastic, for people out there that have not looked at what Google has been doing, there's a ton of stuff out there on well-being. So I love to see that from an ethical perspective, as you mentioned, Christina, from a company as large and has that big visible footprint, if you will, in our society, to take that upon themselves, because in the minds of many, they don't have to. So I just want to take a moment to give Google kudos for that. When I think about digital well-being, and this may not be a textbook definition, but I think about the management of one's use of devices, as well as the ability to contribute to the soundness of a healthy approach to such as well. So there's a supportive aspect that I see of digital well-being, because we need to support the mental models that users have. But we also, because there are some inherent dangers and challenges, we also have to engage in providing resources that are preventative as well. So from that holistic perspective, I see the supportive and I see the preventative. And we have to take all of them into consideration in order to support that. We have an ethical responsibility to build some aspect of digital well-being into the solutions that we provide.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I wanted to jump to this topic, which is that we know that in UX, traditional success metrics for the products that we design usually focus, or at least feature, engagement as one of its metrics. So how much are people engaging with it? How frequently are they using the product, and things like that? And we also know that as UX practitioners who are aware of digital well-being issues, that we have this responsibility to respect our users' needs for focus and for quiet. And engagement is not always what our users actually need more of, quite the opposite sometimes. So how do you think we should be thinking about this going forward? How should we be measuring success of our digital products, do you think? And I'll open this to any of the panelists who is interested to talk about this.
I'll go ahead and start. Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say I'll give the UX side of it. I think that, again, we have support, and we have, from a well-being perspective, we have support, and we have the preventative aspect. But there's if I look at the old traditional UX Venn diagram of the user needs, the business needs, and the constraints, looking at it from that angle, there is always what do users seek to achieve? What needs are being fulfilled by what we're providing? So those user needs will never lose. They'll never lose their point of focus. But on the business side of things, business is not really changing that much either. So businesses they're trying to make a profit, or they're trying to generate goodwill. The profit is not always measured by the dollar sign. There's also an aspect of brand goodwill, the BX, or the brand experience associated with it. So I think from that design perspective, I think we're still focused on the same. There's just an extremely increased focus on the detrimental impact, which I think is what caused the digital well-being to take center stage to a great extent. We just have to, again, the ethics, we have to bring that into the focus and actually add that to the Venn diagram. There needs to be a focus on what are our digital well-being contributions or our points of focus, and it's going to vary from product to product as well. A game digital well-being, the focus there will be different than somebody who's trying to find a mortgage broker if they're buying a house. Different flavors, but still the responsibility is the same. And then we have to be flexible and shift and pliable to shift based on what our responsibilities are and who we're working for.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Laura? What is your take?
Yeah, I love the emphasis on users' needs. What came to mind for me was users' goals. So can we have a better understanding? Can we cultivate a better understanding of what users' goals are and whether we're helping them, make progress toward or meet those goals? And I think given the importance of mental well-being right now, what we're seeing in the research is that people are really struggling with mental health challenges and achieving basic mental well-being. And so even just better understanding how are we helping the mental well-being of our users? Are we reducing stress, or are we increasing stress through our, let's say it's notification design, or the ways that we've created an interaction design to facilitate interaction with news content? Is this, creating stress, or is it actually reducing stress? Is it leading to positive mood or not? And I think those are things that we can measure. I think some of the ways of measuring those are still fairly experimental, but I think we can get closer. We can move the field closer to being able to ask those questions. And another one I would call out is habits. So tech use behaviors can become automatic. And once that automaticity kicks in, it can be really difficult to cultivate new habits. And so I would say it's, a really good success metric to understand habits and whether we're fostering healthy habits when we look across use of technology throughout the day. And, one thing that I would love to hear from Jana would be also, for kids and teens, how are we enabling experiences that meet the needs of their developmental stage? So getting really into the nuances of what tech use means, social uses of tech versus learning technology versus play, and thinking about well-being in the context of developmental goals for kids and teens, as well as for adults, right? Maintaining social connection, cognition, all of those things come into play. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's also like an interesting aspect from the design perspective that kind of builds upon everything that has been said so far. But basically, like if you look at UX and what means successful design for businesses, that's oftentimes like, can we persuade the user to purchase or to spend as much time as possible within the app? And that often is measured as a snapshot in the moment. So it's not over a longer period of time. It's very like instant. And on the contrary, if we look at designing for digital well-being, the success is basically in, as you mentioned, in helping users achieve their own desired behavior. But this can only be evaluated over a longer period of time. And when I'm reflecting on design processes, I think I see like a tiny hiccup there. Like design processes are constantly evolving, but there is still a structure that hasn't changed much, which is how we move from idea to launch to maintenance. So essentially, if you look at the discovery phase, at that point, designers are often incentivized to truly understand people's behavior in their wider contexts of their life, to really go in depth. And then products are often shaped accordingly. So how do we really feed these products into people's lives? But then after the launch happens, the products, as in the product teams, are often not that much interested in the wider context of life, but more into people's relationship with that particular product. And what I would really like to see is more emphasis on how that product influences their broader life. So to somehow focus, basically to shift to measuring the change of users' behavior over a longer period of time, so that we are essentially like not designing experiences that force the change, but instead designing experiences that are flexible enough to adapt to users' changing behaviors, which foremost means like we need to allow for intentionality so that users can really be intentional about their actions at every step.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting point, and I think trying to understand how it seems like for something like this to work, products should, in a way, have a two-way conversation with users that carries on from you know, it's almost like it should be a relationship that builds over time, and you learn more about each other, and you help each other in different ways, and there should be some kind of, I don't know, a two-way system that benefits the user and the product in adapting to that user's needs. I think I've been in many conversations where something like was suggested that maybe we could try and get users to give us a bit of feedback of how they're feeling about this and all that, so that we could adapt. But then there's the fear that you're going to put a burden on the user, and you don't want to burden the user into getting them to give us feedback. But at the same time, maybe if a user feels the benefit of doing something, like feels more like it's, you know, you're teaching someone to help you, it's a two-way conversation. Maybe there's something in there.
It's almost like, I'm not sure how common that is for Britain and the States, but I remember like in the countries where I was growing up, it was really common that you would get a doctor for life. So the doctor would be with you like at all times. You would always go back to the same person. And we know that like for various reasons, that's not a good practice. But there is something in this essence of, you know, building on a relationship, really knowing a person. Whereas like what's really fascinating for me here in the UK is that like every time I need to go to a doctor, I see a different person and they have absolutely no context about me. So I kind of feel like we're doing the same with products. At least with like how, and with we, I don't mean we as Google, I mean we as industry. But it's oftentimes like it's this one-off transaction instead of long-time relationship, as you mentioned.
Yeah. And it's also hard to get products to adapt to different circumstances. Like, you know, we're living in this very extreme situation right now. I think, you know, we've overused the term unprecedented lately. I'm personally quite tired of hearing it, but I think it's true that this pandemic has changed everyone's lives in one way or another, and technology is playing a huge part in all of it. And I'd like to talk to the panel a little bit about this, what this pandemic means for people's digital well-being during, but also after things move on to what's called the new normal. First, I wanted to just run a little panel, a little poll, so our second poll, to just get a sense from the audience. So has your tech use changed since the pandemic started? Are you using it more? Are you using it less? Are you using it in a different way? Or is it just the same as it was before? Just have a look at the answers. Yeah, using it more, using it differently are big winners. Using less, no one's saying that they're using it. It's also not the same to most people. Yeah. So tech use has been a positive in many ways during this pandemic, right? I mean, it's keeping people connected. It's allowing many people to work from home or even to get essentials when they can't leave the house. But it's also overloading people in a way. And so there's no separation between work and life. There's nowhere to hide from technology these days. So I'm curious to hear from the panel on what's happening in terms of people's digital well-being right now. And also, how do you think things will pan out in the new normal, if there's such a thing? How should we as UX practitioners be thinking about this now and what's coming next? Let's see, Jana, would you like to kick that one off?
Sure. Yeah, such a good question, right? I mean, we know every day there's a new study that comes out. I think I just saw another series yesterday in the New York Times here. We know the pandemic is creating kind of, it's like, it's the duality, right? It's created these unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety and mental health concerns. And it's created an opportunity in many ways for many sectors, for many of us to ask questions, to sort of draw awareness to our technology use in ways that are pretty much unprecedented. The amount of attention that we're all spending and giving to thinking really intentionally about how is my life now mediated by technology, and is that serving me or not? And that's created, I think, an opportunity space for us to ask questions that might have been kind of under the radar before. You know, I mean, as you know, at Hopelab, we focus on young people. And, you know, we know that Gen Z is really taking a hit right now. The pandemic has been especially hard. We know from study after study that there's just variation in the way that the pandemic is impacting mental health. I know especially in the US, where several of us, like the panelists, are based, you know, there was just, as I mentioned, a story that came out based on a study in the New York Times yesterday, looking at a large sample of adults from their early 20s all the way up to their late 60s, showing that in general, folks are not necessarily feeling more lonely, but Gen Z is. In fact, they're the loneliest, once again. And they're really, high school students are saying they're more unhappy, more depressed. And it's interesting, that story I thought in the New York Times was really interesting because they were making the point that this seems counterintuitive. A lot of people feel like, well, Gen Z is already living online. They're digital natives. They're already bonding with their friends via text and TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. So one would assume that this wouldn't be that different. And I think what's interesting about what we're seeing is that it is different. And that the pandemic has sort of shone a light on the role of technology, that technology isn't the relationship, it's in support of the relationship. And when the relationships are fundamentally disrupted, technology doesn't in its own fill that gap. So it's really, I think, shining some important lights on how can we use technology to support the relationships which are actually the things that drive our well-being in the first place. So maybe I'll pause there and let some other panelists jump in on that.
I think that's, oh, sorry, Brian, go on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to reflect on the relationship part. And it's interesting, like if we recall social interactions that we used to have before, when socializing face-to-face was more common. And I guess it's not hard to remember how we ourselves and our friends couldn't go for more than a few minutes without checking our phones. And that was like, interrupting that connection, relationship. And now, like during the pandemic, like I see amongst friends and even myself that we are all more glued to technology. But the beautiful aspect that came with pandemic is that we are craving this social connection. So I wonder if, like, basically before pandemic happened, when designing for digital well-being, we had this premise that we need to prevent distraction and encourage intentionality, encourage like basically focus on the moment. But the problem there was that users found it quite hard to see the benefit of spending less time on their phone. So that's why, many different tools that are intentionally meant for digital well-being didn't really work. And now that going outside is kind of luxury, especially going to nature, seeing friends, meeting them face to face. I think it's really like we really have this opportunity now that as industry, we try to design for basically enabling meaningful connection, not basically facilitating it, but mediating it, trying to make it better. So I wonder if I think there will never be like it was before. It's going to be different. But I wonder when we have more time to meet, more time when we are allowed to meet people face to face and in a safe way, if we'll do it the same way as we did before, of constantly being disrupted by our phones. And I wonder what can we do as designers in that space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And just kind of riffing on that a bit, I was thinking that a lot of the tools that we're using to connect weren't designed with different social uses in mind. So a lot of video conferencing, for example, video conferencing wasn't designed necessarily for play or for, adapting to different identity expressions. Or for bringing your whole self, to work. And so it was really sort of, it's optimized for, being able to focus on different speakers and have, chat function, as well as being able to focus on slides, to present content and then discuss the content. And so when we go from, Sarah, really like what you said about, we tended in the industry to think about supporting presence, like real-time in-person presence with people through how we think about distraction and interruption and potentially reducing notifications. But as we move more and more online, every aspect of our lives essentially is lived online these days. What does it mean to foster social connection and for our tools, to understand how our tools are shaping that now and how that could be different? I think that's a really important area for future work. And also, for me, also kind of this is getting a little bit away from the social connection piece, but thinking about digital well-being in the context of everyday well-being and how we foster that. So, late night use of technology tends to be a big concern. Thinking about how tech can support healthy habits, for general well-being, in addition to social behaviors and social connection, getting good sleep, getting some exercise. We know people are going to the grocery store less, and so potentially getting less fresh fruit and vegetables. So what will that mean for nutrition if we're basically relying on pantries? for some of our nutritional content. Well, how can tech help to enable better understanding of strategies for how to live healthy every day, right, in a pandemic like this? So I think these are all, we're really expanding the definition. One thing we found is that expanding the definition of digital well-being to encompass elements of well-being that include these healthy habits and mental well-being, sleep, right, psychological safety in all of our online environments, that these are all part really of digital well-being.
I absolutely love that component and the fact that you extended the definition, because my perspectives on digital well-being, again, are very holistic. I'm reminded of how I think that one of the big things, I hate to use the word benefit in conjunction with the pandemic, but there are some, and I see the digital resources as an extension. I have never ordered groceries the way that I've ordered groceries during the pandemic. I have become great at Instacart. I am a Shipt expert now. I did not know that I could order groceries from Whole Foods through Amazon.com. And so it just really, it changed a lot of things. I mean, how the ability to shift and optimize, because the way that we live and the way that we thrive is based on how well we've been able to adapt. And a lot of digital resources have enabled us to do that. It's just been fantastic. I love, you kept mentioning sleep. I have been a huge advocate and user of sleep data, whether it's through my old Garmin app, which actually not old, I'm still a big Garmin person, but I love the Auto Sleep app that I'm an app, I know you got Google people here, but I'm a big Apple Watch person, and the sleep data that I get from this app called Auto Sleep is just phenomenal. I've been paying more attention to my heart rate variability since the pandemic. So there are just all types of different things that I've been doing, and using the digital resources as an extension of myself to do things that I could not do that easily because of the pandemic. And I think I've done a pretty good job of it, and encourage a lot of other people to do the same. It is funny though, that need that we have for that interaction. My wife and I, and I usually keep this kind of stuff secret, but I'm a director of a nonprofit organization, and one of the things that we've been doing is giving away masks. I'm not talking about cheap masks either. I'm talking about really nice masks that come with a series of filters, and people have been coming to our home to pick up the masks. And I think that it's funny, we social distance when they come over, but I think it's hilarious. And I love observing it, how when they come over, nobody ever wants to leave. We'll stand 10 feet from one another and talk, but we will sit out there and talk. So that inherent need for that contact, that human contact, is not being, we know it's not being met through our conference calls or our FaceTiming or whatever resources we're using for such things. I just think it's great that we see that. And I think we'll find our way back there. But I do think we've also expanded our horizons a bit. And I think that a lot of digital resources will never be the same because of the discoveries, the massive discoveries that have been made due to the pandemic.
Yeah. Sorry, Lauren, were you going to say something?
No, I'm just vehemently agreeing.
I wanted to introduce a question here from the audience that I think is really interesting in this topic as well. Someone called Ting Ji, I hope I pronounced the name right, says, the increase of tech use has widened the gap between the tech users and people who don't have access or are unable to keep up with tech, like my parents who don't use a smartphone. They very much feel left out. Do you have any thoughts on how to address the well-being of the tech disadvantaged group? I think this is a really interesting way of looking at it from the angle of not so much the sort of the overuse of tech, but the ones who can't have access to tech in this scenario.
I think it's interesting, right? How our phones are just not adapted to all the different to the different demographic and to the different age groups. well. So I wonder if that's almost like a nice experiment for kids and young adults to have with their elderly parents or grandparents, to have that conversation about their technology and what do they want from it. And then as they have that conversation, they can try and configure the phone's behavior to best suit that person. As in, like, maybe they don't want to be distracted at night. There are solutions for that. Or they only want to hear notifications from particular people. There are also solutions for that are inbuilt in almost all the operating systems of the phones that are available out there. Just like really having that conversations to prevent being a slave of technology and figuring out how to have control over it. Because you can have it if you know that there are ways that can help you with that. But most of the time, the issue is that people don't know that they can do that.
Yeah, I think this also brings up a really important question about our UX design processes and UX research, right, and evaluation. And I think across the industry, I have witnessed an approach where the idea is, let's build this thing, and then we'll have the thing, and then we'll scale the thing, and we'll figure out how to adapt the thing to different groups, right? And I get it, that's an approach, but there's also, speaking about intentionality, right? I mean, there's also kind of an intentional approach that I'm seeing more of, and that really encourages me around, like, who are these different groups? What are their needs? What are their bandwidth constraints? What are their mobility constraints? What financial resources are available to them? If we have, let's say, mobile health technology that encourages going for walks at a certain time of day to get some exercise, what does it mean to that person? Do they feel safe walking in their neighborhood? What are some other ways that we could help them get exercise if they don't? If you can't sleep because you just had twins and you're also balancing a couple different online part-time jobs while you're between a full-time position, right? What does that mean? What does that user need, right? And so, but intentionally bringing in some of these ways of thinking about these different user stories, right, and different needs from the start, and then understanding whether or not technology is working, and if so, why, and if not, why not, and then bringing that back into that iterative design process. I think that's really important, and I think we're starting to do that more, and I'm really happy about that, because I think a big part of it is our design processes and how we define value and how we think about who the user is, and even who's represented in those conversations, right? So there's also, I think, a need when we do sprints and things like this to incorporate users for whom we want to design, and not make assumptions about who those users are. Yeah, I think this is a really important topic that we could spend a lot more time talking about, and I think we could have a whole panel just on this.
Very good. I wanted to move us on a little bit just to talk about a specific group that I have identified, and I know that other researchers have identified as particularly vulnerable to technology in certain ways, but also a group that is a group of digital natives. So what we call Gen Z or Gen Z, so teens, young adults that are about 13 to 24 years old right now. So if you think about an approach that an older generation would have to tech overuse or to the effect of tech is, well, maybe we should try and get them to use less or to be more careful with the use of technology. But for someone who's a digital native and lives and breathes technology since they were born, this doesn't seem to make sense. So I'd like to just have a little think about and a chat about how we should approach designing for this group. What are the specific needs? I know Jana's touched a little bit on this specific needs of this younger generation from a digital wellbeing perspective, but it would be great to hear a little bit more on this front. And we have a question here from the audience that I think is quite linked to this. It's Catherine Kian, I think, asking, how do you address health issues arise as a result of increased tech use? I think that's a big issue that we know exists with this generation. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'd be happy to jump in. First, kind of a word about this generation, just taking a step back to think about what we call Gen Z or Gen Z from the perspective of their age, which is kind of this age range that developmental science calls adolescence. It's kind of the tween years around puberty to emerging adulthood in those early to mid 20s. And, you know, we know that this is an incredibly important age for so many reasons. It's just to give you a sense also of the scale that this generation is rapidly growing. In the US alone, there's about 42 million in this age range. And it's just a time of remarkable growth and opportunity. I'll just do that.
Okay, we're back. Please carry on, Jen.
That's like the hook where they're like, stop talking.
No, please carry on.
But the only other piece of context I was going to add is really, and then I'll answer the question that you all asked, which is that this period of growth just really can't be understated. As a quick stat, we often say that about 25% of neural connections in the brain are gained and lost each week during adolescence. It's second only to infancy in terms of the rapidness and profoundness of the neural change and growth. So this is an age that is literally designed in our DNA to push us outward, to discover, to learn, to adapt to the world around us, to forge a sense of who we are and who we aspire to be, and to learn how to make decisions and manage deeper connections with peers beyond our immediate family, right? So it's a time period where habits, which is something Lauren spoke about, really start to get formed. And mental models about who we're going to be and what kind of the day-to-day version of that looks like starts to really come on the scene. Are we someone who exercises? Is exercise a part of my identity? Is that a thing that I do? That all starts right around that age range. So it's an incredibly important opportunity space, right, for young people. And technology has obviously a huge role to play here. And it's up to us, I think, collectively as designers and researchers and those of us in this space to take that opportunity seriously. And the thing I want to say about technology use and this question of how do we help it not cause health problems is that it's just, there's really a lot of mixed bag in there. Hopelab did a study with the Wellbeing Trust here in the US in about a year and a half ago. And it was a nationally representative study of technology use and health in teens and young adults. And one of the kind of takeaways from that survey is that young people, when asked about their tech use, have high amounts of awareness about the goods and the bads. They can tell you, I know sometimes they're very intentional often about how they're using technology to boost their mood or make connections. And they also know when they're getting kind of sucked down a rabbit hole. And they'll say sometimes, if I use it when I'm feeling down, I start to like spiral. They know. And there is really a mixture of effects that it can have on them, depending on their needs and who they are and when they're using it and their goals and how much those goals are being supported. And I would add, just to the point of kind of populations that may not be squarely in the kind of sights of what the tool is designed for, you know, there are many young people who are very unfortunately don't feel safe in their physical environments. We work a lot with LGBTQ youth for whom the pandemic has been especially hard because they're often sheltering in place in homes or communities that are quite literally dangerous to them, are unsafe for them. And technology is a lifeline. Technology can be a lifeline in many, many cases. So I think when we ask ourselves, well, is social media good or bad for young people? That's really not the right question. We need to be diving deeper into when we need to be talking with young people. I mean, Sarah, you made this point as well. We need to really ask questions that are much more nuanced, like when you're on a device and you're feeling connected and supported, what are you doing? What does that look like? What platforms are you using and how are you using them? And how do you use digital when you're feeling down? And what happens next? And what does that look like, right? And I think there are real opportunities for tech to boost some of these core drivers of health for young people. We know that young people deeply need to and strive to develop meaningful connections. They need to develop autonomy and kind of empowerment, a sense of like, I'm the captain of my ship as I kind of figure out who I want to be, and to make contributions. Adolescence is about developing that sense of contribution. And I think in the US, an example, I'll end with this, that was really kind of powerful in the last 2 weeks. We just had our national elections, as everyone probably knows. And one of the stories in the Get Out the Vote work is the role of young people and the ways that they've used digital to mobilize to get out the vote, to kind of activate their communities, their peers around an issue that is important and that allows them to make a really meaningful contribution and have their voices heard. And so I think what I would love to see is the industry and all of us really paying attention to how can we support these developmental needs of young people via tech, because it's happening. And I think we can be more intentional about ways to support that.
This is great. So thank you so much, Jana, for this. I think this is a really good way to sort of like wrap a little bit this topic. And I just wanted, as a last request to the panel, as we're sort of reaching an end to our time here, is just to, because we talked we covered so many issues. We talked a little about how metrics should be looked at differently, as they are not, we don't want to necessarily encourage engagement, quite the opposite sometimes. We talked about the pandemic and how technology is affecting people and changing behaviors, and some thoughts on how this might play out in the future. I just wanted to ask you to just give our audience of UX practitioners just one, if you're going to give them sort of one principle that is a UX principle from a UX perspective that they can take away with them based on this conversation, what would it be for you, the biggest takeaway? Could I get maybe Sarah to kick us off?
I'd say always try to allow intentionality. So how can the user be truly intentional when interacting with your product? If just one, but there is also a ton of other things.
No, I asked for one because we're running out. That's great. Yeah. How about you, Ren? What's your sort of main advice?
Yeah, I think building on that. So thinking about it, definitely intentionality, that needs to be at the core. I totally agree with Sarah. And I think one way that we can also think about that in terms of guidelines is attention to defaults. What defaults are we setting? How, are those defaults going to be the right defaults at different times of the day? So for example, if our default is endless scroll as a design choice, is that a good default at night? So asking ourselves questions about what is the implication, right, of the defaults that we're setting in some of our tools. Privacy defaults, given what Jana was talking about, if we do need digital spaces to be psychologically safe and foster young people as they explore who they are, what privacy defaults are in place so that we're really maximizing safety in that process. So I think that would be mine, is really focusing on empowering and starting with defaults as a way of thinking about tech. And again, gets back, kind of closes the circle to the beginning where we were talking about self-regulation and the limits of our self-control.
Great. How about you, Darren? And sort of like very, very quick wrap to sort of one soundbite on the topic.
I love what Sarah said as well, but I'll build on that by saying we have to encourage people to respect their own space. And we can do that by providing tips, reminders, updates to encourage people to even spend time away from their devices, but encourage them to respect their own space. I think that's a major factor associated with their well-being.
Brilliant. And finally, you, Jana, do you have a sort of a final advice to give our UXers?
Oh, goodness. Okay, very quickly. I would say design for what matters. So if I could give you 3 kind of big buckets to focus on, think about how can this interaction with this tool elevate what's meaningful? Number 1, meaning and purpose. How can this interaction with this tool elevate the connections that matter? So human connection, number 2. And 3rd, how can what we're building and co-designing enable agency and intentionality and control, a sense of agency and kind of I'm steering my own ship, to go back to Sarah's point among the folks, among people who are using it.
Amazing, thank you. Well, this is all we had time for in this panel. It flew by, but thank you so much, everyone, for listening and participating with your questions. Very sorry we didn't manage to get through all of them. They were really, really interesting, and at least we covered some of them in our conversation. But yeah, thank you so much to our incredible panel: Sarah Lunde, Jana Harry-Tetters, Lauren Wilcox, and Darren Hood. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Chris.
You. It was amazing questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being our moderator.
Yeah, amazing. I'd like to echo that as well. Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you to all of the panelists today for joining us. Thank you to Google, thank you to Darren, Jana, Lauren, and Sarah.